Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for an absolutely incredible story. We're talking about a story of immense resilience, of awe-inspiring architectural rebirth, and of a legendary stateswoman who literally changed the landscape of an entire subcontinent. We are looking at the phoenix arc of Rani Ahilyabai Holkar and her monumental, tireless effort to breathe life back into one of the most revered spaces in the world. How did a widowed 18th century queen navigate intense grief, hostile empires, and mind-boggling logistical challenges to rebuild India's destroyed sacred sites and ultimately forge a legacy that outlasted the greatest military conquerors of her time? Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. First, we're going to examine the historical context in The Fall of a Shrine. Then, we'll look at the rise of Queen Ahilyabai. After that, we'll break down the strategy behind rebuilding Kashi Vishwanath before zooming out to look at her truly nationwide cultural legacy.
Part 1. The Fall of a Shrine. Cycle of Destruction.
Now, the Kashi Vishwanath temple isn't just some old building, right? It is a profoundly important Hindu pilgrimage site located in Varanasi, Uttar Pradesh. It holds this monumental religious distinction of being one of the 12 Jyotirlinga shrines. Essentially, these are the most sacred abodes of Shiva, who is revered right here as Vishwanath, or the Lord of the Universe. Because of this immense spiritual and cultural gravity, this specific geographical location was, historically, a major focal point of imperial conflict. I mean, whoever controlled or altered this space sent a massive, undeniable message across the entire Indian subcontinent. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it perfectly illustrates that this site was a historical battleground defined by a relentless cycle of destruction and restoration. In 1194, the original temple was demolished by Muhammad of Ghori during his invasion. Then, fast forward centuries later to 1585, and we see it rebuilt by Munsingh I and Raja Todarmal under the Mughal Emperor Akbar. But, the peace just didn't last. In 1669, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb ordered the temple's demolition once again. And for over a century after that final demolition, the site remained in a heartbreaking state of loss. Part 2. Rise of Queen Ahilyabai. Tragedy to Power. Imagine being in her shoes for a second. Born in a village in Maharashtra, Ahilyabai was married into the powerful Holkar family of the Maratha Empire. But in 1754, absolute tragedy strikes. She is widowed when her husband dies in battle. Then, in 1766, she loses her father-in-law, who was her main mentor in diplomacy. At this point, with her son too young and unfit to rule, the Malwa kingdom could have easily collapsed. It was right on the brink. Instead, she completely steps up as regent. She appoints her husband's cousin Tukoji Rao Holkar as the new military commander, while she firmly takes charge of the civil and religious affairs of the state. She quite literally transformed her personal grief into decisive, action-oriented leadership. But here's the thing, her leadership wasn't just administrative. It was deeply, deeply personal. Ahilyabai was a fiercely devout follower of Lord Shiva. She viewed her political power not as some tool for personal glory, but as a divine duty to protect and promote Hindu dharma and to serve her people like a mother. Historical texts actually note she was deeply pained by Aurangzeb's earlier demolition of the Kashi Vishwanath temple. That specific loss really resonated with her own devotion. And it was this personal spiritual connection that became the driving force behind a political willpower so strong it would permanently alter history. Let's move to and see how this builds into Part 3. Rebuilding Kashi Vishwanath, Logistical Masterstroke. By 1780, she initiates an incredibly complex process. Let's break it down. Step 1 wasn't just about laying bricks. It was about brilliant cross-cultural diplomacy. Varanasi was actually controlled by the Nawab of Awadh at the time. So instead of using brute force, Ahilyabai sent a formal letter requesting his permission and cooperation, which, amazingly, she successfully secured. Step 2 is an absolute marvel of 18th century logistics. She dispatches emissaries, masons, carpenters, and sculptors, along with heavy funding, raw materials, and an architectural model of the temple, all the way to Varanasi. Just think about the sheer coordination that took. And finally, Step 3, the culmination of this massive effort. The temple is completed, and in 1785, Ahilyabai herself performs the consecration ceremony. She successfully navigated tricky political borders and logistical nightmares to achieve the impossible. But great leaders don't just build for their own time, they inspire the future. Ahilyabai Holkar did the crucial foundational work of rebuilding the main temple starting in 1780. Her dedication basically set a precedent that echoed across entirely different kingdoms. Decades later, in 1835, Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the Sikh Empire was so inspired by the sanctity of the site she restored that he contributed roughly 800 kilos of gold to plate the temple's domes. To put that into perspective, that is an astronomical contribution. Ahilya's initial spark ignited a chain reaction of reverence across different empires. Part 4. A nationwide cultural legacy. Beyond Varanasi. Her construction empire was just staggering in its scale. She actively financed, renovated, or outright constructed temples, ghats, wells, and schools in Somnath, Dwarka, Gaya, Mathura, Ayodhya, Haridwar, Kedarnath, Badrinath, Rishikesh, and even reaching as far north as Kathmandu in Nepal. This wasn't just a building project. This was an active, strategic effort to weave the cultural and spiritual heritage of a vast subcontinent back together. And she didn't just build them and walk away. She provided the ongoing funds for their maintenance, proving her dedication was built to last for generations. So, the crucial point is this number right here, 29. She ruled as regent for 29 years until her death at the age of 70 in 1795. Over nearly 3 decades, she ruled with immense benevolence and justice. She genuinely cared for the welfare of her subjects, regardless of their caste, creed, or religion. Because of this, she didn't just earn the love of her people, she commanded deep, profound respect from rival powers across the board. We're talking the Peshwa, the Nizam, the Rajputs, the Sikhs, and yes, even the British. Historians, poets, and scholars have bestowed so many titles upon her over the years, but perhaps the absolute most fitting is the Philosopher Queen. She stands today as one of the most inspiring figures in Indian history, a towering symbol of women's empowerment, unwavering courage, and pure devotion. She took a legacy of destruction and single-handedly turned it into a renaissance of culture and faith. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. When modern leaders face shattered institutions or deeply divided societies today, what can they learn from the quiet, unstoppable resilience of an 18th century queen who chose to rebuild the world rather than conquer it? Think about that for a bit. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one. In the dense, pulsing center of Varanasi sits the Kashi Vishwanath temple. For Hindus, it is a Jyotirlinga, a site where Lord Shiva is believed to have manifested as a piercing column of infinite light. The modern sanctuary is defined by its sheer physical wealth, soaring domes plated in 800 kilos of gold, donated to ensure the shrine remains a visible beacon for miles. Yet, despite a spiritual lineage stretching back millennia, the actual walls and spires standing here today are a relatively recent addition to the city skyline. The ground beneath this temple has been the focus of a violent, multi-century struggle. This single patch of earth has been cleared and built upon repeatedly as invaders and native rulers fought over the city's religious heart. The temple's history is a repeating cycle of demolition and reconstruction, a record of a civilization's persistent effort to maintain its physical presence in its most sacred city. But that cycle turned violent in the year 1194. Forces led by Muhammad Ghori overran the city and leveled the original structure, leaving the site reduced to rubble and its priesthood scattered. Local populations eventually returned to rebuild the sacred site, but by the early 1500s the site was targeted again, this time by the Sultan Sikandar Lodi, who ordered another round of systematic destruction. A rare, brief window of stability arrived under the Mughal Emperor Akbar. In 1585, his generals and advisors Man Singh I and Raja Todarmal were permitted to restore the shrine to its former scale. This restoration lasted less than a century. In 1669, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb issued a final sweeping decree for the total demolition of the Kashi Vishwanath temple. Aurangzeb aimed for more than just clearing a site. He sought to dismantle the physical anchor of the local culture, hoping that without a temple, the spirit of the pilgrimage would finally fade. By the mid-1700s, the physical heart of Varanasi was a landscape of ruins. The most important site in the Hindu world was an empty space, and for a generation it seemed it might stay that way. Ahilyabai concluded that her leadership would be defined by her ability to restore the sacred landscape that had been systematically dismantled. To reclaim Varanasi, she chose a campaign of diplomacy and engineering over a traditional military siege. She secured the necessary permissions by opening a dialogue with the Nawab of Awadh, the local ruler who held administrative control over the city. In 1780, Ahilyabai funneled craftsmen from the Maratha Empire to rebuild Varanasi. The work catalyzed a massive expansion, funding restorations in Somnath, Dwarka, Kedarnath, and Ayodhya. She also built the civic infrastructure, ghats, wells, and schools, to turn these sites into functioning communities. Stone by stone, Ahilyabai's administration reassembled the scattered pieces of India's cultural map. By 1835, the structure Ahilyabai established had become so central to Indian identity that other rulers sought to add to its prominence. Maharaja Ranjit Singh, leader of the Sikh Empire, provided the temple's most famous finishing touch, donating the 800 kilos of gold to plate the domes in a gesture of pan-Indian solidarity. Today, the site shows a thriving vitality. The ruins left by the 17th century demolitions have been replaced by a dense ecosystem of pilgrims, scholars, and commerce. This expansion continues into the present, most notably with the 2021 Kashi Vishwanath corridor project, which has drastically opened up the space between the temple and the river. Ahilyabai Holkar is remembered as the philosopher queen because her legacy was built on the preservation of a culture's sacred heritage. Kashi Vishwanath exists today because of a calculated effort to ensure that even if stones are broken, the will to replace them remains.